Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Trevor and I'm the Communications Manager for the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network, or CCSN. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar in our flagship series. If you're new to our webinar series, the CCSN is an organization working with cancer patients and survivors to learn about the complexity of our health system, connect with others to plan action, and act on those plans to create better outcomes and healthy survivorship. Please visit our website. You'll find plenty of information like news, events, information, and of course, our webinar series, this one, and also our new webinar series, Cancer Survivor to Financial Survivor. Now, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on YouTube, and a link will be provided by the email that you registered with. We will have a quick Q&A session at the end, but you don't have to wait until the end to pose your question. There is a chat function at the bottom of your screen. Please put in your questions in the chat at any time, and we will get to them and the end of the presentation. And now on to our presenter. Ellis grew up in Victoria, where she gained a diverse background in geography, kinesiology, and health promotion research before pursuing her passion in dietetics. She weaves together her experiences to help inform her approach to health and work as a dietitian. Ali strongly believes that all pillars of health and well-being are interconnected and is incredibly passionate towards the role nutrition plays in supporting one's health and well-being. In her free time, you can find Ali out hiking with her dog Rouge, getting in a round of golf, or experimenting in the kitchen with new cookie recipes. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Ali Ellis for her webinar, Getting Your Gut What It Needs, a Post-Cancer Treatment Nutrition Guide.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Trevor, for that introduction. And hello, everybody, and thank you for attending today. So great introduction. My name's Ali. I'll be chatting about getting your gut what it needs. And a little, I work at Inspire Health Supportive Cancer Care. And so I'll just provide a little introduction to Inspire Health, and then we'll chat about our digestive system. We'll chat about the digestive process today, go into the importance of our gut and all of the different amazing roles that it plays. We'll go over the gut microbiome, the importance of the gut microbiome. And then we'll take a look at how treatment can impact our gut health, and then really go through how can we support it and how can we incorporate different nutrition strategies to support our gut health and promote a healthy microbiome. All right, so like I mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian at Inspire Health, Supportive Cancer Care. And so we offer guidance and support for people with cancer or those at high genetic risk and their support people. Our programs and services emphasize evidence-based lifestyle approaches to help support enhancing that quality of life. So we're a not-for-profit organization. We were founded in 1997. We have partial funding from the Ministry of Health, and then we also rely on the generous donations from the community. And this allows us to provide all of our classes and programs completely free of charge. And so there's no referral required to access our services. And then we offer some online and some in-person options. So we have 3 physical centers. We have a location in Vancouver, Victoria, and Kelowna. So I'm out of the Victoria location. And then as a result of COVID, we have a very large online presence and community now, which has really been amazing to allow us to expand our reach and make our services a lot more accessible. So just to provide an overview, so our services and our team, we have a multidisciplinary team made up of supportive care physicians, dietitians, exercise therapists, care coordinators, and then clinical counselors, and all working together to support patients and work alongside you. Okay, so we'll dive into the nutrition side of things. So nutrition, I always just like to start off with this. Nutrition is a complex science. It's always changing. Lots of information is always evolving. And also to highlight that everyone is different and many people can have different circumstances, and this can affect their nutrition recommendations. So with nutrition, we really do encourage that one-to-one meeting with a dietitian can be really supportive and helpful to tailor that information. And so the information I'll be providing today is provided as general. So of course, individual modification may be needed. All right, so if we look at our digestive system to start off, and so our digestive system consists of our gastrointestinal tract, the liver, pancreas, and gallbladder. And this GI tract is this long tube, and it connects these different hollow organs. So this includes the mouth, through our esophagus, our stomach, small intestine, and large intestine, and then the anus. And it's quite long, so 25 to 30 feet in length, um, which is quite significant if you think about that length. And so this digestive process can take a while. And of course, it varies for everybody, but approximately that 12 to 72-hour process. And then you can also find a lot of bacteria in this GI tract. And this is known as our gut microbiota, or might also refer to as gut bacteria. So our digestive process actually starts when we even just see and smell food. And so our saliva, it begins to release these enzymes, which start that digestion of carbohydrates. So we have both the chemical digestive processes and mechanical, and then that mechanical with our chewing, our teeth grinding up that food. And this chewing actually begins to send a signal to our stomach and saying secrete some acid and digestive enzymes. Food is coming, it's on the way. So that process really does start quite early, and then works together to help move that food along. So peristalsis, again, mechanically helps to move that food along. And then that acid in the stomach helping to destroy some of those harmful pathogens, also helping with releasing enzymes that help break down that food further, which allows the foods, once they're broken down enough, then our body can absorb those nutrients and really use those nutrients. And then from what's not absorbed are waste products from the digestive process and the sloughing off of different GI cells. These start to form that stool. And then peristalsis continues to move that food to the rectum until it pushes out during a bowel movement. So with the digestive process, so we talked about food going through the mouth and then down the esophagus and then into the stomach. And in the stomach here, very muscular and chemical breakdown. So very acidic in our stomach with that hydrochloric acid, and really an important role, that acid to break down that protein, helps with breaking down things and making them more accessible for absorption. So it's quite a process of storing and mixing, and this both mechanical and chemical process of mixing that food and then turning into what we call chyme. And this is then released slowly into the small intestine. So very gradually that food mixture is released. That bicarbonate from our small intestine helps to neutralize the food, and so that it can move into the small intestine without impacting that. And this is where a lot of absorption occurs. So almost 90% of nutrients are absorbed here. And if we were to lay out the whole small intestine, and it would almost be the size of a tennis court, so almost 22 feet long, so quite incredible surface area. And this surface area is due to these villi and microvilli. And these are these small finger-like projections. And then there's projections on those projections that really help increase and maximize that surface area for the important role of absorption. So all of this surface area really helps to absorb all of those different nutrients like vitamins, minerals, fat, and carbohydrates. And then we have our large intestine, or our colon. And so about 5 to 6 feet in length. And the colon here absorbs a lot of water, electrolytes like sodium and potassium. Here, the fecal matter, or the stool, is stored, and then slowly moving along through before elimination. And this is where we also find a lot of bacteria. So a lot of that gut bacteria here are stored live in the large intestine. So that bacteria have a number of roles, which we'll get into, but help produce B vitamins and vitamin K, and there's fermentation going on here.
Actually, your Windows mullions, your mullions are quite.
And so a lot of different roles here from the bacteria in the large intestine. So as you can tell, and as you probably know, there's our digestive system is pretty amazing and has obviously very important. enables us to really absorb the necessary nutrients from food and drink that our body needs. So helps to break down proteins, breaking them down into these amino acids, which we then use as these building blocks for so many things in our body. Helps to break down the fats into those fatty acids and glycerol, breaking down carbohydrates into the simple sugars to help provide us energy that our body needs, and helps us with accessing those vitamins and minerals in water, which are also really key nutrients that we need. All right, so if we start to look at now this gut microbiome, and I mentioned the gut bacteria that we start to see, especially in the colon. There's of course a little bit in the small intestine as well, but really a lot stored in the colon. And so this gut microbiome, it's actually referring to that entire habitat of bacteria and viruses and fungi, all these different organisms and their surrounding conditions and genome. So with the gut microbiome, if we imagine sort of a diverse forest of trees, bushes, animals, plants, insects, all bustling around and in healthy conditions, coexisting really peacefully and working very symbiotically together. And our first exposure to a lot of these microorganisms and gut bacteria actually occurs as an infant, right when born through birth and delivery, and then through mother's breast milk, and then different environmental exposures and diet continue shaping and changing one's microbiome. And really like to highlight that the microbiome profile is so unique as a fingerprint. And so there is no perfect microbiome. It's really about that diversity and the number of species and just that really kind of rich, diverse environment rather than this exact profile. And of course, lots of research in this area trying to get a sense of which is most sort of supportive and healthful bacteria that live here, but a very unique and diverse environment in the microbiome. And so there's a lot of different factors that can influence the microbiome. So things like exercise can have really positive influence on the microbiome and that gut bacteria, diet, and we'll of course talk about that and how that can influence that gut bacteria, lifestyle, stress, different diseases, geography even, so the location where we live in the world can have an impact, age, medications, and as an example, antibiotics can change that gut bacteria and impact certain strains or impact that diversity. Various treatments can impact our gut bacteria, even pets. So there's a number of factors that really can influence the microbiome. And so we'll focus on a few of these today, but recognizing there's a lot of different things that impact. So in terms of functions of the gut microbiome, so talked about this rich, diverse forest, and it really is about this symbiotic relationship. So this close interaction between the living organisms, having a mutually beneficial relationship. So we provide food and shelter, and they provide a whole host of benefits. And really, we're still only beginning to learn about this, and research will continue to evolve in this area. So a really important role around with digestion and fermenting fiber and producing what are called these short chain fatty acids, which have been shown to have a number of supportive benefits and being quite anti-inflammatory. The gut microbiome also, these gut bacteria can synthesize vitamins, synthesize things like B vitamins and vitamin K and amino acids. They also play a big role in that gut barrier health. So they can help to improve the gut barrier and supporting that health and function of cells lining the large intestine. Play a really big role with immune function, and pretty amazing that almost 80% of our immune system is actually housed in the gut with the immune cells there, and play a role with inhibiting pathogenic bacteria, helping to keep populations of immune cells in check. Modulating some different activities they're involved in and controlling our immune defense against various pathogens. So really big connection with our gut microbiome and our immune system. Also play a role with the development of metabolic functioning, and then mood as well. So you might have heard of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. This carries messages between our nerve cells and our brain, and plays a really big role in mood and our mental health. And actually 90 to 95% of serotonin is actually produced in the gut, and all these serotonin receptors found in the gut. So it can play a really big role with our mood and an influence on mood and our mental health. So many diverse functions of the gut microbiome, and a lot of things beyond just food kind of moving along that digestive process. I'd really like to highlight, so kind of touch on this a little bit when talking about serotonin, but this gut-brain connection. And so there really is a strong connection between our gut and our brain, and it's sort of this two-way connection. So it does go both ways, but just some examples of this. So if you've ever been sort of feeling some stress or nerves about something, you might feel that in your stomach, feel the knots or the tightening in your stomach. Or maybe if you're feeling really excited, you might feel some butterflies in your stomach. So kind of highlighting that link between our brain and things that we're perceiving, and then also with our gut. Another example is if you imagine taking like a lemon, for example. You slice up the lemon and you go to take a bite into this juicy, sour, tart lemon. And if you really kind of visualize and think about that, sometimes this can even evoke a bit of a response with our salivary glands starting to release and produce saliva. And even though we don't actually have that lemon in front of us, that we're just imagining it, the fact that it can still start to, that digestive process can actually start to begin, and releasing that saliva as if it were, as if we did actually have it in front of us. So this process of digestion really does begin quite early on, that sight of food, or like I mentioned, even just imagining food. And then there's also a lot of psychological factors that can affect contractions within the GI tract. And so if we think of our nervous system, and if you think of times of sort of high stress or fight or flight response, that evolutionary response where maybe we're being attacked by a tiger, we've got that fight or flight. And when that part of our nervous system is activated, it's actually diverting resources away from our digestive system. And so shunting resources in other places so that we can move and run away and be on the alert. So contrary to this, that when we have that rest and digest part of our nervous system, this is really where we're starting to direct our resources back to our digestive system to be ready to take in food and absorb it and move it along. So really want to promote that part of our digestive system when we're eating food, that rest and digest part, because that can impact then the contractions and the movement of food through our digestive system. And really our gut has so much autonomy. It's also referred sometimes to as the second brain, as it's working to control so many processes without us having to think about it, with gut movement and fluid exchange and different gastric secretions. There's a lot of localized blood flow there in our digestive tract. And just it can receive input from both parts of the nervous system. And so, like I mentioned, in times of stress, those resources are diverted away, and then times of rest and digest bring those resources back to support digestion. And so there's a lot of research and continuing to grow in this area about supporting the role of stress reduction and improvement with digestive symptoms. And so when we think about this connection, can see how there would be that link and can make sense. And so we'll definitely chat a little bit about that too at the ends, about ways that we can really support that digestive process. Okay, so thinking about treatment and how treatment can impact our gut health. And it can impact it in a variety of ways. And of course, this really depends on a person too, and the various treatments that someone might be undergoing. So with some chemotherapies, they may have an impact on rapidly dividing cells. And along the GI tract, there are quite a few of these rapidly dividing cells. And so these can be impacted. And this can present in ways like nausea, reduced appetite, taste changes. And then in turn, when these things might happen, like having a reduced appetite or experiencing nausea, this of course can impact food intake, which can also have a role and impact our gut health, since we might be taking in less food, which can be challenging. It also can impact it can decrease the support of gut microbes. So it can impact both the diversity or maybe the amount of good bacteria, or just impact certain types. And this can lead to some, it's called dysbiosis. So dysbiosis referring to less good of the good bacteria and sort of less diversity, and can have a bit of a role in some dysfunction. We talked about the link with like immune function and serotonin and mood. And so this can impact immune function, can impact mood. Sometimes the change in that gut bacteria can impact the intestinal lining, so that lining of our GI tract, and cause what's called increased like permeability. So between the cells, they're a bit more permeable. Things sort of go in and out, so can have that impact on that intestinal lining. Can also impact with inflammation in the gut, which can cause changes with releasing of certain signaling cells and different neurotransmitters. Radiation might have can have changes in the gut microbiome, and then surgery, depending on the type of surgery, and can of course impact the gut microbiome, especially if part is even removed, and the impacts there. But also just to really highlight that even if there isn't that direct impact on the gut microbiome, lots of other things that might be going on, such as the changes in appetite, stress, all of these other pieces can impact our food intake, and can impact that gut bacteria and that gut health. So there's a number of kind of different factors that can play a role. So now if we think about, so how do we support our gut health? And what can we do from a nutrition standpoint to support it? And so we'll chat about high fiber diets, as high fiber foods tend to increase more favorable species in the gut. There's also research to support the variety of plant-based foods, and how these are associated with improved diversity and resilience of the gut. I'll chat about plant-based proteins to help strengthen that gut barrier, and to evidence that they support reducing some of that inflammation. We'll chat about prebiotic and probiotic foods. So supporting that live bacteria and providing food for the bacteria, and also supportive fats. So fats that are monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, that provide those wonderful omega-3 fats. So provide some examples of those. These are things that have been linked and shown to support our gut health and support that diversity, and that resilience. And just to highlight, because I know it can be really challenging when we think about the changes that might be happening to our gut, but the gut microbiome can begin to change in as little as 24 hours in a response to major shifts. So it is quite resilient, and if it's been impacted, absolutely can support it, and provide nutrition strategies to support that diversity, and can really start to see that change pretty quickly. So before we sort of dive into fiber and a lot of those plant-based foods, just like to highlight and acknowledge that lots of times people may have low fiber considerations. And so sometimes people may require a low fiber diet, whether this is a temporary or long-term as directed by a doctor or a dietitian. If there's just impacts with our bowels and any sort of chronic dysfunction, so that might have some of these considerations around fiber. And so I know it's going to be tricky for a lot of people, and concerns around how do we get the nutrients we want. And we absolutely can still do this in a way that provides a lot of important nutrients, and we can still support our body and our gut health. But a few considerations with, especially with fiber in general, is just going slow. Really going slow with that introduction and checking in with the body. We'll talk about with soluble fiber foods, and we'll talk about the difference between that and other types of fiber, but sometimes these can be a bit more supportive, things like applesauce and oats and bananas. And then there's some different preparation approaches we can take when someone does have low fiber considerations, with cooking with fruits and vegetables or removing peels and skins. But really do encourage one-to-one support can be really, really helpful here, just to make sure that what's been recommended to you and how to incorporate foods that can then align with those recommendations for what you need, and how to still make sure you're getting the nutrients that your body needs. And so just with the low fiber consideration, sometimes I like to use use an example of like a gym analogy. And so say we've been going to the gym for a while and lifting a lot of weights or whatever we might be doing there. And then if we have an injury, sometimes there's that rehabilitation time. And so we don't just jump right back into lifting full weights. Maybe we need to just start with some exercise bands or start with just lighter weights and work our way back up. And so similar with fiber, if we haven't been having a lot of fiber in a while, or if we're having been recommended to have a low fiber diet, that's where it's kind of like that rehab for the gut. We're going slow. We're incorporating some different foods and some ways of kind of modifying the foods like we would modify the exercises in the gym, and just to work our way back up. But really do encourage that one-to-one support if that's an area that you're struggling with. All right, so with fiber, so fiber is these non-digestible carbohydrates. So they're found only in plant foods, and there's lots of different types of fiber, and they have different properties. So we'll talk about soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, and also resistant starch and what that is. So soluble fiber absorbing that fluid in the stool, and absorbs a lot more water and moisture. And that insoluble fiber is a bit more of that roughage. And we'll go into these in detail, but just recognizing that there's a lot of different properties with fiber, but really they're that non-digestible carbohydrate found in those plants that continue moving through our body. All right, so the soluble fiber. So like I mentioned, think of it as something that really absorbs water. So things like oats and chia seeds, they really soak up and absorb that liquid and can form this sort of thick, viscous liquid. They can help with really slowing digestion, because if a carbohydrate food is quite refined, it can move through our body quite quickly, and that digestive process, it's quite quick, where soluble fiber can help slow that digestion, slow that movement along, can help with satiety and keeping us full longer. Also helps with soften, and because I mentioned like binding that fluid, can form almost like a gel. So can be supportive for helping with reduce diarrhea, because of that role with soaking up some of that liquid and absorbing that liquid. And so some examples would include things like flax and chia. And with flaxseed, often it can come in that whole flaxseed. So we'd want to grind it down into that flaxseed powder. Just otherwise, it's challenging for our body to absorb and use. So flax and chia seeds are examples. Oats and barley, beans and lentils. And then apple, like the flesh of an apple. Also citrus and bananas, psyllium as well, which is just that plain sort of soluble fiber. And with soluble fiber, so flaxseed, for example, often will, if someone's struggling with those bowels, this can be something that will start with a small amount, just like even half a teaspoon of that ground flaxseed, and mixing it in with some water, some oatmeal, or like some applesauce, and can kind of work our way up in increasing that. And this can be really supportive with just helping to bind that stool and that absorbing that liquid and helping with those bowel movements. And I'll just highlight here that we do have, if you're wondering about lots more information about fiber and these roles, that we do have a nutrition and cancer 101 talk that we do at Inspire Health, that really can talk about all of these pieces and those considerations as well with the low fiber. All right, so next one is that insoluble fiber. So insoluble fiber really adds that bulk to our stools, can support with reducing constipation, because of providing that additional bulk, and sometimes can contribute to gas and bloating. So again, really encouraged to go slow with some types of insoluble fiber foods. And so a few examples may include things like so whole grains. So that bran, that outer layer of bran, so it hasn't been refined or processed down, but retaining a lot of that outer layer in it's intact. Nuts as well, so things like almonds, cashews, walnuts, pistachios, so a variety of nuts can provide that wonderful insoluble fiber. Beans and lentils, and you may notice that beans and lentils were also on the last slide, so they have both types of fiber, and which is absolutely common, and lots of foods will contain both types of fiber. And then most vegetables have insoluble fiber, and especially like the skins. And so this, like I mentioned, with the low fiber considerations, might be an area where we're removing those skins if that's what's more supportive for somebody. And then again, fruits as well, and that skin providing that roughage, that insoluble fiber on there. Just a note about resistant starch. So resistant starch, so as its name sort of says, so it is a starch, so but it kind of acts like fiber, and it resists that digestion in the small intestine, and it can help really with slowing digestion, and has a lot of benefits on human health through these its prebiotic benefits. They're fermented in the colon and can help produce these short chain fatty acids in the colon, which have a number of supportive roles. And so this starch, yeah, resists that digestion. It moves into the large intestine and is used as that food source for a lot of that healthy bacteria living in our colon. Also can help play a role with maintaining the health of the cells in the colon. So acts quite similar to fiber, but it is a starch. And so some food sources would be things like legumes, beans, slightly green bananas. So when bananas turn completely yellow or with their brown spots even, those starches have broken down a bit more. And so they're no longer going to be that same resistant starch. So if they're a little bit green, they've got a higher amount of resistant starch there. And then I put cooled potatoes. So various starches, like things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, pasta, rice. So when we cook these foods, it breaks down, the heat will break down a lot of the starches. But if we actually let them cool a little bit afterwards, as they cool, these starch bonds begin to reform. And it actually increases that amount of resistant starch. And so it can play a role and help with that satiety, has a lower impact on sort of our blood sugars, because now it's producing a smaller rise. It's a bit of a slower digestive process. So by letting some of those starches just cool a little bit, those bonds will reform. Okay, so looking at prebiotics and probiotics. So you may have heard of probiotics before. So probiotics, those live supportive bacteria, and a whole bunch of different beneficial types. And then we have the prebiotics. So the prebiotics are those non-digestible carbohydrates that provide food for that gut bacteria. So we just mentioned one with those resistant starches, but there's others as well that we'll speak to, but both really, really important. And can be really supportive for that gut health and gut diversity. So with prebiotics and prebiotic fiber sources, so again, it's that non-digestible carbohydrate that acts as food for those probiotics, that live bacteria in our gut. So lots of fiber-rich plant foods. So examples of some prebiotic foods include things like garlic, asparagus, Jerusalem artichokes, leeks and onions. Also things like barley, rye, whole grains, apples, again, the green bananas, slightly green bananas, beans, legumes, chickpeas. And so these help provide a lot of that wonderful food for our gut bacteria that they can use and ferment in the colon. And so there's a number of different types of prebiotics, and won't go into all the kind of different types, but this list speaks to types from different categories, but really encouraging that diversity of those foods to help provide that food for the healthy bacteria. All right, and then we have our probiotic and fermented foods. So probiotics being those foods that contain that live bacteria. This could be things such as sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented vegetables, kefir, yogurt. Sometimes yogurt has probiotic strains added, or sometimes just the live bacteria, not necessarily the probiotic bacteria. Buttermilk or miso, kombucha. And so these have that fermentation process, and with the probiotics, and there's these are food forms, and of course there are also those supplement forms, and really encourage the food forms of probiotics to support with that gut bacteria, and of course just important considerations with them. And so if you have additional questions with probiotics, always encourage chatting with someone about them and what can be most supportive for you with where you're at with treatment. And then there's even some fermented foods such as like sourdough bread. So sourdough bread is fermented, and it does make it more digestible, but the bacteria aren't necessarily, they're not live anymore as they've gone through that heating process. And so this is the same with a number of the probiotic foods. If we do heat them after the fact, you do lose some of those live probiotics. They're still great, wonderful food sources, but that's where sometimes doing two approaches. So maybe if you're having a miso soup, that heat might have impacted some of that live bacteria, but then maybe adding a bit of miso into a salad dressing, and then it's not going through that heat. So we're still getting a lot of that wonderful live bacteria in the miso. All right, so we talked about the different fiber sources, and of course, fiber sources, that non-digestible part of those carbohydrates, and just like to highlight sometime with like fruits and vegetables, and some of these things about how we can access them and how best to use them, and then we can look at how do we sort of put all of these things together. So with the carbohydrates and with fruits and vegetables in particular, and of course we talked about those whole grains and beans and lentils as well. But with fruits and vegetables, encourage that minimum 5 servings per day. Again, if that is appropriate for you, encourage with actually fruits and vegetables. So with this fresh versus frozen, we find that this comes up a lot. Both are wonderful options. And with frozen fruits and vegetables, they're picked and then frozen at peak ripeness. So they retain a lot of their wonderful nutritional properties and components. So especially in the winter time, I know this can be really challenging to access different fruits and vegetables. So just like to highlight that absolutely frozen can be a great option. Seasonal and local is lovely when possible. Also, just recognizing what's accessible for people. So lots of considerations when picking out these foods. And then just the difference with different approaches of preparing them. So raw versus cooking versus fermenting, and really just encourage that variety of incorporating with different ways. And that's because sometimes, as we talked about with the fermentation, that can improve that digestibility and bioavailability of some of the nutrients. And similar with cooking and raw, sometimes cooking in that heat, we might lose some, but we also some might become more bioavailable. And so just encourage all of those approaches when preparing those fruits and vegetables, that all can have different benefits. And then with in their whole form versus smoothies and juicing, we talked a lot about fiber, and of course that fiber's retained in both the whole forms and the smoothies. Though we do lose that fiber if we juice and pull that fiber and that pulp out. So really encourage in those whole forms with those fruits and vegetables or smoothies that retain that fiber. Just so that we're getting the wonderful fiber of all the great fruits and vegetables. All right. And then looking at protein. So we we talked about the fiber and the carbohydrates, and protein really important for balancing. And we'll talk about this when we put it all together about balancing out those meals and snacks. And of course, protein plays so many important roles with maintaining muscle and tissue repair and immune function. And our protein needs may be increased during and often are increased during and after treatment. And so there's a variety of sources, and we've talked a lot about plant-based proteins in terms of that relationship with our gut bacteria and health. But of course, there's a whole bunch of sources, and everyone is different, and different ones can be more supportive for people. So empower you to make your own choices about the different protein sources that are most supportive, but this includes foods like beans, nuts, legumes, meat, poultry, eggs, fish, dairy, tofu. So whole variety of different protein sources when we start to pair and put these things together. And then also just wanted to touch on fats playing that really important role with our cell membranes and brain cells, and wonderful energy source, and talked about their role as well with that supporting with our gut health. So some examples of whole food fat sources, things like nuts and seeds and avocado, fatty fish, various oils and olive oil, coconut, and really like to encourage. So there's these omega-3s and omega-6s in the fats, and really it's about the ratio. Lots of foods will have both, and we may have heard about omega-3 fats and how wonderful and supportive they are, and absolutely, but really it's that ratio. We just want to make sure we're getting lots of wonderful omega-3 fats in our diet, but of course lots of those foods have omega-6s in there as well. So great sources of omega-3 fats include things like cold water fish, walnuts, flaxseed, chia seeds, hemp seeds. So a number of different sources to get those wonderful omega-3 fats. So in terms of how to start to put these things together, so here's some ideas for balancing out, making balanced meal ideas. And when I use this term balance, just encouraging to include protein and fat and those fiber carbohydrates. This is really supportive with our blood sugar balance and with our energy levels. And so that's what's kind of referring to with that balanced word there. And so here are just some examples. If we're having something like an oatmeal, could try a baked oatmeal, adding in either some eggs or a flaxseed egg with apple and cinnamon. So we're getting some of that great prebiotic effects from the apple, some wonderful fiber with the flax, or we could add different seeds like some hemp hearts on top, or bacon with some chia seeds. Or if you're just having regular oatmeal, get some consideration to your toppings. Maybe you can add some hemp hearts on top, some berries, and maybe some cinnamon in there, and just kind of thinking about how to boost those. So that's not just the oatmeal, but we can boost with some protein and with some fiber. And then another example for having a smoothie, maybe there's lots of wonderful veggies and fruits in there, but looking at adding some of those wonderful fats and some protein as well. So fats could be from avocado or like a nut butter, also fats in the hemp hearts and chia seeds, while also boosting that fiber and plant-based protein there. So can give some considerations if you enjoy smoothies, what could maybe add in there. Another example would be something like if you're having some whole grain toast, so some really high fiber toast, can add egg or tofu on top with some tomatoes and spinach. So really kind of that additive approach of how can I boost a bit more of maybe some of those fiber foods that we chatted about, and some of those probiotic foods. With various soups, stews, and grains. So adding things like lentils and beans, chickpeas into these, or a legume salad. So we're just encouraging that additive approach and checking in with, okay, is there some protein, we've got some fats here, and that fiber piece to really balance out those meals. And then in terms of balanced snacks, and I know it can be really easy just to sort of grab a piece of fruit, grab something quickly on the go. So encouraging that balance concept again of having some protein with the fiber food, to again help with that, even blood sugar levels and even energy levels, and then it has that role with supporting our gut bacteria. So some examples could be things like homemade muffin using something like a buckwheat or an almond flour, incorporating in some zucchini and walnuts, and you can always add in some more seeds, some of those hemp heart seeds or pumpkin seeds. If you're grabbing a piece of fruit, see if you can pair it with a little bit of nut butter, like some peanut butter or almond butter, or maybe a handful of nuts and some hemp hearts on top. Something like a chia pudding can be a great way for getting that soluble fiber from the chia seeds, and can play around with the different mix-ins with the pudding, and just encourage to let those chia seeds really soak up that moisture, and then they'll form that kind of pudding consistency. So this can be something that works great as doing overnight chia pudding, adding in berries and cinnamon and nuts into the pudding, and can play around with the different flavors of doing a berry one, or like an apple cinnamon, or a peanut butter banana. Again, that whole grain toast idea with adding on some nut butter or some avocado, or in this case, nut butter and pear. You could sprinkle some of those seeds on top. So just seeing how to kind of balance out some of those snack ideas. So in terms of just some practical tips for putting that all together, so give me some thought to your meals and what might be an area that you could add in something. So again, breakfast can be an easy way to add in some of that ground flax, mixing into oatmeal or some yogurt, or adding on some of those hemp hearts or seeds on top of a smoothie or oatmeal or your cereal. Lunchtime could consider incorporating like a plant-based protein sandwich, like a chickpea salad sandwich on whole grain bread, with different vegetables in there if you enjoy them. We talked about snacks, but those fiber-filled snacks. So an example could be like some hummus, or a bean dip. So with other vegetables or some whole grain crackers. And dinner can look to explore ways of boosting some of those plant-based proteins, some of those beans and lentils and chickpeas. Could blend them into a pasta sauce, or adding roasted chickpeas on top of a salad. Of course, I'm always encouraging for doing lentils, so you can either have the canned ones or cooking from scratch. Both are great, but just making sure that we do cook them. And if we're having them from a can, can give them a really good rinse, and that can just help sometimes too with our digestion of those foods. And of course, if you don't have a lot of those lentils or beans or chickpeas in your diet, just encouraging to go slow with them when incorporating in. And then can kind of take that concept of that half that plate vegetables, and then we've got that quarter with those various proteins, could be both plant and animal sources of proteins, and then those fiber foods. So a little bit of kind of that plate model. All right, so just to summarize some of the nutrition strategies we talked about, and then I'll just mention some additional strategies for supporting that gut microbiome and our gut health. So we talked about the variety of the different fruits and vegetables per day, and really looking at those different types of fiber foods, and including those whole grains and beans and lentils and seeds. And of course, did have that consideration in there too about sometimes maybe low fiber considerations, and so to really take it slow, and encouraging that one-on-one to support to help with that area. It talked about the prebiotic and probiotic foods to support that gut bacteria and diversity. And then went through some ways of balancing out those snacks and meals with the protein and the carbohydrate and fats, to really balance that out. Helps with our satiety and our energy levels, and helps with that slowing down that digestive process. So I just want to mention some additional strategies. We talked about nutrition strategies, but really so many different factors impact our gut health. And we talked about that at the beginning, about those different things that play a role, like lifestyle and different stressors or medications and whatnot. So we would like to encourage looking at some of these additional strategies as well. Around food, that chewing food really slowly and thoroughly can help with our digestive system and food moving through. Sometimes deep breathing before eating, even just a few simple kind of deep breaths in through the mouth and out through the nose. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the nervous system, and supporting that rest and digest. part of our nervous system and just sort of slowing things down and making our body ready for food and to digest the food. So a little bit of breathing can be really supportive. That piece around mindful eating, and just noticing our foods and noticing with our senses, or those in the color and the smell, and those different pieces, and just having some of that mindfulness around eating and with our foods. Hydration absolutely plays a huge role, making sure we're staying really hydrated with fluids and water, and of course lots of other things as well as water contribute to our food status. But hydration really important for digestion and our gut health. Stress reduction, and stress management. So finding ways that can just help with stress reduction. So lots of things, lots of different programs and things like meditation or Qigong people can find really supportive. We have lots of stress reduction programs that we offer at Inspire Health to help with this area, and because there is quite a link and a role between stress and our gut. And of course, there's lots of things out of our control. So looking at how we can incorporate just strategies for coping with stress, and then working with what's within our control. Sleep can play a really big role with our gut health, and trying to get that sort of just consistent sleep. So not just the amount, but consistent timing, and it helps support our body align with our kind of natural circadian rhythms. So looking at that sleep, and also plays a big role with our various hunger hormones. So trying to get some support in that area, and then movement as well. And this will look different for everybody. That movement can also be really supportive with our gut microbiome and that gut bacteria. But also just like to highlight that can you kind of think of it as like a wheel, like all of these pieces that contribute to our gut health. So there's a number of different pieces, and don't need to focus on all of them at once. Can just sort of focus on one if you like, one that seems feasible and can support our gut health with just that area, and then can chip away and then incorporate other areas, but doesn't need to be all at once. Can just pick one thing to start to help with that gut bacteria. And like I mentioned right at the beginning, really neat that we can start to create those changes in our gut health. And then just to say that we've got lots of nutrition support at Inspire Health. And so I just thought I'd highlight some of our workshops that we touched on some of these topics, but we go into them in a lot more detail. So Nutrition and Cancer 101 is a really great class just to go through a lot of sort of common questions and things, and we talk through a lot of those. This is a great one to start off with. We've got one on blood sugar balance, mindful eating, and how stress and nutrition connect, along with a whole lot of others. And then also have our cooking classes and incorporating a lot of these foods into various recipes, and then we always put our recipes on the website as well, so you can check those out as well. And then of course provide individual support with follow-ups as needed. So if any of those sound like they'd be supportive for you, you can always check out our website, and there's the option to book online, or call, or email, and one of our amazing care coordinators can connect with you. All right, so want to leave a little bit of time for questions. So thank you everybody so much, and I would be so happy to take any questions now at this time.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation, Alison. It was fantastic. We already have one question from Peter. He says, I have completed 18 months of androgen deprivation therapy, after radiation for prostate cancer. I'm interested in the relationship between choline and TMAO, as I have been warned not to eat eggs, chicken, and dairy. Can you address this, please? And I apologize for mispronouncing some of those, but the question is in the chat. If anyone would like to put their questions in the chat as well. But again, Alison, is it possible that you can address this connection?
Yeah, so you do find with specific therapies that maybe somebody has gone through, and then if they have these kind of warnings around some of these foods, I really like to address them in a one-on-one. Just because there's lots of different considerations, and would really want to take a deep dive just to make sure fully understanding, just where the recommendations coming from, and what all of the considerations are, and just to make sure that it is most supportive for the individual person. So I find it just really tricky to address that one in a group setting. So I'd really encourage reaching out for a one-on-one just to really dive into with a relationship there, and with those specific warnings that you received with the foods.
Raymond, you have a question and you raise your hand. If you can unmute yourself, if you'd like to say that in person, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. You were just speaking of probiotics. I had talked to someone, and I was having quite a bit of flatulence, and they had suggested that I probably needed more probiotics in my gut. So they suggested supplements. What do you think about supplements? You know, the pills that are 2 billion bacteria or something.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And so I do encourage food forms of probiotics first, and really looking at that area for a person. But probiotic research, it really has come a long ways. And there is a lot of research now that can support with certain probiotic supplement strains, and what somebody, what they might be experiencing, which digestive symptoms they might be experiencing, or if they have IBS, or if it's something related to antibiotics. So really the research has improved. So I think it absolutely can be supportive for some people. And this, because the research has actually improved so much, and we have a better understanding of some of the specific strains and what could be most beneficial for someone, this is again where that one-on-one conversation can be really great. So we can look at, okay, what might be the most supportive one for this person, and have they tried probiotic foods, and then if still looking for something else to support and bring in some more of that diversity, can really look at which supplement would be most supportive for someone. But yeah, it absolutely, they can be supportive for some people. And then also like to just mention that, again, I find this is another one of the areas that's changed a bit, is that maybe we used to take them really long term, like, oh, just take a probiotic and then off you go. But really would look at just making sure we're checking in with it, and maybe it's a shorter term thing, and we're just kind of replenishing some of that gut bacteria and diversity, and then we're supporting after that with our foods. So I find it can be a great thing to just really talk about one-on-one to make sure that it's tailored for you. But I encourage the short answers, encourage the food forms. But yes, supplements in probiotic forms can be supportive for some people if we make sure we're just matching up the most appropriate one for someone.
Excellent. Thank you, Raymond. One other question that we have from Catherine. The services that you've mentioned, are they available to residents of Canada or only to a specific province?
Yeah, really great question. So our virtual online services are available to all across anybody in Canada. So absolutely can attend our cooking classes and our workshops and our yoga and meditation and all of those class offerings. There are some just differences with some of the individual services. So sometimes, just depending on a person's practitioner and where they're licensed to practice in, that can just impact where somebody is in Canada and their access to that service. But really encouraged to reach out to one of our care coordinators, and they can talk through where a person's living and what services then would be available. But certainly all of our online services and programs are available to anybody in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Amal asks, what makes a food fermented, and as they are usually high in sodium?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so it's when the food's gone through this process with kind of that live bacteria, and so goes through that fermentation process. So there has to be that live component to kind of go through to have that fermentation process occur. So sodium, yes, sometimes used in the fermentation medium, but there's also like I'm thinking of rinsing and different things that can help support with some of those foods, or even just like a tiny bit. So if you think of something like miso, which you're right is quite high in sodium, we're really only using a little bit, and that can still be really really supportive for introducing. So that can be a way as well. And then there certainly are other options too that maybe are a bit lower lower in sodium as well.
Marcia asks, it's been about 3 years since I completed chemo for breast cancer. I continue to have some indigestion. Can I expect this to go away at some point soon?
Yeah, and so this is where everyone's so different and how their body responds, and so can be a great area where we could again that one-on-one support and really looking at from a food approach, but really also just that holistic approach to try and do some investigative work and figure out why is that indigestion still occurring. Is it something related to the treatment? Is it something now related to something else? How can we best support that gut bacteria to support with that indigestion and those digestive challenges. So I find, looking at and helpful to really talk through with someone to really look at all of the different factors that could play a role to try and support that and to change it. And it can take some investigation work, but absolutely can see changes and improvements.
Jill asks, can I use almond milk that has no sugar in my morning tea while I am doing intermittent fasting?
Yeah, so and not just with like the specific kind of intermittent fasting, protocols and things like that. I think having, a little bit of almond milk, in a tea, sounds lovely. And I think there's probably a whole other discussion on intermittent fasting. But generally, I've heard that that can be okay. But again, that'd be something that would really explore with somebody. Just one-on-one with that to get a sense of kind of where they're doing that in terms of like with their treatment and what they're doing it. But I'm sure a little bit of sugar-free or no sugar added almond milk in tea sounds quite lovely.
Now, for those of you who are asking, yes, there is going to be a recording of this sent to the email that you registered with. So if you missed something, don't worry, this will be online by tomorrow. And we're going to wrap things up quite quickly. But one more question that I actually have, Allison.
Sure.
Because of how just, I guess, the dietitian field is and how there is how some things seem to work. There is the opportunity for a lot of people to sell supplements that might not be working or that don't exactly do what they are labeled to say that they do. So what are some tricks or some tips onto finding stuff on the shelf that looks like it's good, but trying to figure out if it actually will work for someone and it's not just misleading?
Yeah, such a great question, Trevor. And it's definitely conversation with like a healthcare professional, I find, can be really supportive to go through that and to really, just take a look, at the particular supplement. And I think also there's just a big range. If somebody's looking for, say, just like a multivitamin supplement, then lots obviously of great brands. So there's a lot of range in the supplements. I find if somebody's really wondering about just some other supplements beyond sort of like a vitamin or mineral, Memorial Sloan Kettering has a really supportive About Herbs database that can provide some useful information for people for getting a sense of what would be supportive and also things to just be aware of. But really encourage just that conversation with a healthcare provider, just to make sure that it's supportive for a person and not missing a piece of if something really important from an individual perspective that needs to be taken into consideration, which sometimes can be challenging if we hear that something's great and worked for somebody else and then want to take it for ourselves. But maybe everyone's different, so there could be different considerations there. So yeah, that conversation piece. There are some supplements that will have like a third-party testing, or kind of like a check mark that says they've gone through. There's like an informed choice check mark that say they've gone through informed testing. But yeah, it's tricky because there's just so much out there, and such a range, and so many different locations. So I encourage, yeah, having kind of a conversation with a member of your healthcare team to talk through just which ones would be most supportive, and then what to look for and type.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Allison. This has been a very enlightening conversation. And also thanks to everyone who posted a question. These were very, very good questions. And I think that it's a fantastic conversation with those. Thank you very much, Allison, for a wonderful presentation. Now, this presentation is one in a series that we have. We have more coming up in the next couple of weeks as well. We are just dotting the T's and crossing the I's with that one. And we also have some more on the way with our Cancer Survivor to Financial Survivor webinar series as well. Now, very important, if you're not seeing anything in your email inbox about our latest webinar series or what we're doing or our newsletter, make sure you check your spam folder or any other folder, because it might get lost in there, because we do use a third-party email service. So add us to your contact list if you can. Otherwise, if you have anyone who would be interested in these webinars that we are presenting, head on over to our website, survivornet.ca. You can find all our webinars on demand. You can subscribe to our newsletter and find a lot of information about cancers, events, and what the advocacy work that we're doing here at this organization. So Allison, thank you once again for a lovely webinar, and I hope to see all of you guys on the next one. Have a good night.